And stepping out of the batter's box will be Scott Lynn. Scott Lynn is the man behind the voice heard by many Oregon sports fans. You can hear Scott as sports anchor morning and afternoon on KEX. I think his only problem with Portland is that he has to get up at 4:30 in the morning in order to start off that 6 o'clock broadcast. He has won his station and himself many honors and awards for his excellent sportcasting. Then we'll hear from Will Glascow, president of the Portland Metropolitan Sports Authority. I think Will named that himself. Will has an impressive background in the fields of law, in business, and currently is a partner of Shaw, Glasgow and Company. This man truly wants to load the bases for big-time baseball in the Rose City. Jack, we start off with you. Let's play ball.
Well, I don't know how often you've seen somebody of my body stature being a leadoff hitter, but we'll try. Usually those are the real skinny little guys, but we'll try. Just want to thank you for inviting me, Steve. It's a great lunch. I'll start off with a real quick joke, then we'll get down to seriousness. About my doctor told me I couldn't eat any red meat, and this chicken today reminded me of that. When my doctor told me that, I promised him I wouldn't use as much ketchup on my hamburgers. So I want to talk about a couple things today, and really the number one thing is what we have learned in the last year about baseball in Portland, and secondly, what it would take to bring Major League Baseball to Portland. You know, for years, we've had baseball in Portland since 1903, professional baseball. We remember the times of Vaughn Street when baseball was pretty successful pre-World War II, and right after the war it was pretty successful. Then with the addition of television and baseball on television, minor league baseball kind of took a nosedive. And since that time, since television, baseball in Portland has not been known to be really or overly successful. As a person that grew up in this town, as a person that went to Vaughn Street and then to Multnomah Stadium, now Civic Stadium, I felt in my mind that yes, Portland was a baseball town. I think we proved that this past summer. We drew just shy of 250,000 fans in 38 dates at Civic Stadium. There were 2 years since baseball had been at Civic Stadium. 1956, the first year there, they drew 305,000 fans in the Coast League, and in 1983, the year they won the Pacific Coast League pennant, they drew 283,000. So we broke all the attendance records for Civic Stadium, with the exception of those 2 years, in about half the number of games. So that proves to me that Portland is a baseball town. People will come out and watch baseball if they know there's a game tonight. I think that was part of the problem we might have had. You know, this talk that when the mayor made an announcement about a month ago of the possibility, or of exploring the possibility of attracting Major League Baseball to our city and building a stadium in our city, made me feel very proud that we finally have a mayor in this town that is at least thinking progressively. And I don't mean to knock the past mayors, but we have been known in this town to be kind of a little bit a step slow, I should say, in some of the things that we've done in the past, and we have a mayor now that's thinking progressively. Let's at least see what it would take to do it and see if it's possible. We've had other people, city leaders in the past, that have thought, well, we can't do it, let's not even talk about it, but that isn't the case. You know, the question is there enough corporate support? And as you all know, any professional sports franchise needs corporate support to survive. And the question is there corporate support in this town? I say the answer is yes. There are a lot of world headquarters in Portland, Oregon, and in the Northwest. We don't need to just concentrate solely on Portland, but the Northwest and the West Coast. And there are, as you know, there are large numbers of major corporations that would like or would need to be involved in a professional sports team in sponsorships and suite purchases or whatever it might be. And you know, that suite purchase is a big thing. I don't know how many of you have suites at the Trailblazers, but at the Rose Garden, I should say. But if it weren't for some of the suites, that it would have made it a lot more difficult to finance that facility. I think, you know, the next point I had here is their fan support, and I think the answer to that is yes, because of what we drew at the short A level and only playing 38 dates. Yes, there's fan support. Yes, there's problems of playing in April and May, but there are problems in April and May in New York City, in Boston, in Denver. And Denver, for instance, is a community about the same size as Portland, and Scott will probably have some more exact figures on that a little bit later. But Portland is about the same size as Denver. Denver has 4 major league teams: football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. We have 1 major league team. Yes, it could be supported in this town. What it would take to attract Major League Baseball? Well, number one thing is a new stadium. Major League Baseball is not going to think of coming to Portland playing at Civic Stadium. I love Civic Stadium myself. We refer to it as Historic Civic Stadium instead of Civic Stadium. But well, if we had a little brick around the front of it, it probably could be considered historic. But the number one thing we're going to need is a stadium, and the mayor has put together a task force to explore the possibility of what it would take to build a stadium in this town. It has to, I think we'll get in a little further on that, but it's something that has to be maybe some private money and tax dollars combination. But we'll get into that part. You know, I think if Portland had a stadium like Coors Field, Jacobs Field, Camden Yards, it would be no problem averaging 30,000 people per game. I think that it has to be a situation where it is attractive, and I just know it would happen. What it would involve to either bring a team here. Okay, we've built a stadium. We've got that Coors Field or Jacobs Field here. Next step is what it would take to get a team here. Well, there's two options. One is to buy an existing team, a Houston Astros or one of the other teams that have not been doing too well financially, and move them here. Well, it's not quite that simple. You can't just go out and write them a check and say, I'm going to move the team from Pittsburgh to Portland, Oregon. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever the case may be, but it's a fact of life that it would take 3/4 majority by the other owners to allow somebody to move a team, to allow anybody to move a team, and so, you know, this is something that has to be explored. You know, we can't go out and write a check for $150 million and buy a team and say, oh, by the way, we're going to move it to Portland. And the other owners are going to say, whoa, no, you're not. So we have to explore those possibilities first. It would take a lot of lobbying prior to the purchase, a lot of lobbying with other owners to allow that to be done if the team would be purchased. The other option would be to possibly get in the lottery, you might say, for an expansion team. Baseball is going to, probably in 5 or 6 years, expand by another 2 teams. Very probably one of those cities would probably be Washington, D.C. or Northern Virginia. But we don't know for sure, but it's politically correct to have a team close to Washington, D.C. besides the Baltimore Orioles. And so it's my feeling, and that's my personal opinion, that Washington would be one of those cities. So there's still a chance that Portland could land that expansion franchise. Well, again, we don't wait until the last minute to land that expansion franchise. You know, I know for a fact that Denver worked for 10 or 11 years lobbying baseball on the fact that they they wanted to have a team in Denver, and they were 5 years ago awarded the National League franchise when baseball expanded, and it just didn't happen overnight. So the mayor's task force, which has to do with stadium funding and the possibility of building it, needs to also look into the fact of what it would take to lobby either a current team to be able to move here, or the possibility of getting an expansion franchise. So, there is a lot of work to be done, but I think that I have found that this town is it has a lot of people that are willing to do that kind of work and willing to roll up their sleeves and just get to work. So, I definitely think it's a possibility. That's why I have volunteered to be on the mayor's task force on the stadium situation. I think it is a possibility. I don't know how soon. It's not a 2 or 3 year thing down the road. We're sure of that, because it would take that long to build a stadium. But it is a few years down the line. But I do think it's a possibility, and I want to be involved in it.
All right. I want to thank Don and Steve for having us here today, and thanks to all of you for coming out. I'd like to begin with a quick recap of my love affair with baseball, if you'll permit me to do that. I grew up in the heart of Illinois, it's dead central part of Illinois, near Springfield actually, where you're either a Cardinal fan or a Cub fan. You're one or the other. My father and my grandfather before him were both Cardinal fans, so obviously I grew up listening to Harry Carey and Jack Buck on the St. Louis radio network. I know what baseball can do to bring families together. Both my grandfather and father were farmers, and I wanted no part of that, at least at that age. But baseball brought us together. It was something we had in common, with Musial just wrapping up his career and Gibson and Brock just starting theirs. It was a fun time to be a Cardinal fan in the 60s, and the Cardinals went to the World Series 3 times, 64, 67, and 68. Mickey Lolich of Portland broke my heart, as a matter of fact, winning 3 games that year for the Tigers. But I was a fan for life as a result of that, and little did I know how the labor problems of today would test our love for the game at that point. But I came to Portland in 1980, still a baseball fan, very much missing it, as I had worked in Tampa. And getting to see all those teams come in for spring training year after year was just wonderful for me. But I came to Portland in 1980 as the weekend sports anchor at Channel 8, and then spent the next 6 years as that station's sports director. I moved to KEX in 1989 when KEX acquired the Blazer contract. I went there to do the 5th quarter and sports line, and I replaced Darrell Lonnie, who had moved on down the highway to Corvallis to work for Oregon State full-time. I was host of Sportsline on KEX Radio from 1989 until just 2 months ago, when I gave up that program because I was burned out. And I was burned out because I was tired of talking about the Blazers and the Ducks and the Beavers night after night after night, because, hey, good subjects, to be sure. But truly, I found it frustrating at times not to be able to talk about my first love, which was baseball. And I had to temper that enthusiasm because I still had to address the needs of my listeners. And people in this area were always willing to talk Blazers and Ducks and Beavers. And whenever I tried to get a conversation going about baseball, more often than not, I found that I was talking to myself. Not always. We had some phone calls from time to time from some of you talking about Vaughn Street, or maybe a baseball stadium in a city in which you'd lived previously. But only rarely did I sense that passion that we will have to have for Major League Baseball to come here. I often wondered, is Portland a good baseball town? Jack said yes, and he would know maybe better than I. But I've received more calls from listeners whenever I'd bring up the subject, well, instead of watching baseball or going to a game tonight, what are you going to do? And they'd talk about going on the drive through the Columbia River Gorge, go to the coast, go to the mountain, whatever, hiking trips, camping trips, whatever. Baseball just was not a priority to most of those listeners. And what's scary about that, what's really scary about that, is that this is a sports talk show. Those are sports fans out there. The general public is going to have even less emotion regarding baseball. But whenever that subject would come up, I tried often to point out the things that it would do for Portland, how it would be wonderful to go to the ballpark night after night, seeing the best players in the game, how it would change Portland in the eyes of those outside the Rose City in the Northwest, and how it would give us all a sense of pride. No question about that. We would be a major league city. But only occasionally did I sense that feeling of passion from the listeners out there. The amount of passion that's going to be required to get a team here, because it's a long way. As Jack said, it's not just going to happen because we want one. I still don't have a definitive answer in my mind whether Portland is a great baseball town. When done right, as Jack and Mary have done with the Rockies, fans do turn out. But is there enough support to make that happen, to make it viable on a major league level? The circumstances would have to be just right. And I still have some doubts, to be honest. Quite honestly, because of Measure 5 cutbacks and other priorities, which are hard to argue with, I'm sure we would have a very big problem getting voters to support the building of a stadium. And I believe it would take public-private partnership of some fashion, using all kinds of tricks or means of getting there, user taxes, selling the personal seat licenses. Then we'd have a chance. If we could convince the people in this area that it's going to take, the people who use the stadium are going to be the ones paying for it, much like the Blazers have done with the Rose Garden, then it has a chance. And what kind of stadium? Is it baseball only or is it multi-purpose? I think voters would support construction a little bit more favorably if it was multi-purpose and you knew that perhaps Portland State could play home games there, or maybe the high schools or things like that. But in this time in baseball history, we've gone away from the cookie-cutter stadiums like Cincinnati's Riverfront Stadium, Busch Stadium in St. Louis. The multi-purpose facilities have been changed in recent years to the baseball-only facilities. I don't want to get too much into the stadium because still I think Will's going to address that in some fashion, but I want to consider what I've learned about the Northwest sports fan in talking with them night after night. If there's one thing I have learned in hosting Sportsline these last 7 summers, is that Portland fans, and not just Portland fans, but fans of the Northwest, support a winner. I think winning is just critical. The Blazers began their sellout streak after they won the championship. The enthusiasm has begun to ebb away a little bit in recent years, although the new facility will I'm sure, recapture the interest of the fans. The Winterhawks drew huge crowds when they were in the 80s and 83 winning the Memorial Cup in the Coliseum. And of course, they're drawing very well again now in the Rose Garden. Rich Brooks' job was said to be in trouble. The Ditch Rich t-shirts and all were in vogue last year after a 1-2 start. Autzen Stadium was not filling up, not even close, until fans realized this team has a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. Then Rich's job was safe and they filled a facility. Oregon State, #1 in the nation in basketball in 1980, and you could not find a seat in Ralph Miller's house at that point. Truly, this area supports winners. And it's true everywhere, but it certainly is true here. There's no arguing that fact. Winning makes it happen. And the bandwagon, as we all know, just gets bigger and bigger, and we all jump aboard. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it is a fact of life here. With that in mind, I think it's best if an existing franchise is what we pursue. That's my opinion after talking to all the fans. I don't think fans in this area would have a lot of patience to support that expansion team, which is certainly going to have a lot of losing streaks before it becomes a winner. Colorado Rockies being the exception. They've done it very well in this era of free agency. Perhaps you can get it going sooner than that. But I think it takes a winning team, which you'd have a better chance of if you had an existing franchise move here. But I would qualify that statement by saying that if the games are played in a new state-of-the-art facility, a stadium along the lines of Camden Yards or Coors Field or the ballpark at Arlington, Jacobs Field, if we have a stadium like that, then I do believe, like Jack, that we can draw the 30 to 35,000 fans that would be necessary to make it viable. So the stadium is important. We've seen examples all around the country. When you make a ballpark the place to go in a city, whether or not the people going to that ballpark even care about baseball or like it, then you've got a chance. You've really bettered your chance for success. There are people living in Oregon and Southwest Washington, plenty of them, enough to support a Major League Baseball team here. But you either have to have a winner or that state-of-the-art facility, and probably a baseball-only facility, in my opinion, a destination stop, a place to go for the night out. I think that's what makes it feasible here. A lot of fans, as we all know, drove up I-5. I did it almost daily, going to watch the Mariners the final week of the season and in the playoffs. The Mariners, Seattle's team, became the lead story on all of our local newscasts. That was really something, considering the rivalry of sorts between the two locations. There was huge interest for this team based in Seattle. And that gives us serious fans hope that we can make it happen here. There is support, there is excitement, there can be excitement generated. And in the Kingdom, no less. Obviously, Portland and Seattle are quite similar in recreational opportunities. We've already mentioned some of the things that they do in Seattle, same things we do here with the hiking and camping and everything. But because we're so similar, maybe we can draw on that and make some comparisons by looking at what happened to the Mariners this year, and maybe it gives us insight into how baseball would be supported here. In September, with the Mariners in contention, the crowds ranged between only 12 and 18,000 a game. 12 and 18,000 into mid-September. Just a couple weeks left in the season. And only when it dawned on everyone that the Mariners could be in the playoffs did the crowds start to grow. And it grew in a hurry. It went from, in essence, 18,000 to suddenly, the last 6 dates, 46,714 was the smallest crowd. They were setting attendance records almost on a nightly basis, but that was only after they won and the people realized it. Final 6 regular season dates pushed the average attendance to just over 22,000 for the year, but there were 45 dates where the crowd was less than 20,000. It's kind of scary. There had been no passion in Seattle. I keep coming back to passion. They needed it there. They got it thanks to the Mariners. But there was apathy. Then all of a sudden, the white-hot passion as they got behind the winner. And if the Mariners hadn't made the playoffs, there'd be no new stadium in the works in Seattle right now, and no baseball in Seattle, quite probably. The team would have been sold and likely moved out of the Northwest before the end of next year. Before the Mariners got hot, the sports fan in Seattle faced the very real possibility that they'd be watching the pro baseball and pro football teams leave their city. The Seahawks are still rumored to be on the way somewhere, whether it's Los Angeles or the most recent rumor is Baltimore. If those two teams were moved, Seattle would be left with just one major league team, an NBA team. And Seattle would be finding itself with more in common than Portland than it would like with just the one NBA club. So winning counts. You cannot underestimate the importance of that fact in Seattle and in Portland. So for it to happen here, we must find a way to build a stadium. No question, Jack's right. Without a stadium, there is no major league team. There's no hope of it. And even with the stadium, as Jack mentioned, there's no guarantee that we can get a team here. I was working in St. Petersburg, Florida, when that area first began discussing the Dome Stadium to bring baseball there. I was there the day they held the news conference and brought out the little mock stadium and went through a lot of changes before they got that dome built. But amazingly, they did build it without the promise of a team. Nobody made them any promises. Just a hope. They built that building. But like they say in the movie, if you build it, we will come. An expansion team is going to begin play there next year in St. Petersburg, Tampa. So almost 20 years after they first brought that little stadium out and laid it on the table for us all to see. So I would agree with those who say it's a huge gamble to make such a bold move now, but that should not stop us from pursuing this dream, because Denver is the 23rd largest radio and TV market in the country, and that city, as Jack said, is home to all 4 major league sports. Portland is the 24th largest market, virtually the same size. And we have one NBA team and maybe the NHL on the way. If Denver can do it, so can we. We have enough people to support a baseball team, and with a really neat stadium to attract fans and non-fans alike, maybe I can be convinced once and for all that Portland is a good baseball town. I want it to happen. I'd like to be a part of making it happen. How do you get on the mayor's committee? I got to do that still. Because, even with all of the labor problems and all the mismanagement in baseball, baseball is still the best game for the family. And having a team in Portland would improve our quality of life, and it would make us proud. We all rally behind the Blazers, good or bad, and I think we'd see much the same thing in baseball, although more rallying if it's a winning team. So while the road does seem bumpy and filled with a lot of potholes, and while some may say, hey, we're just a small town, we don't need another pro team, I say we're missing something, and I think it's something we would all enjoy. So let's keep hitting, trying for that home run. I want to thank you all for having me here today and share my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Given the topic today, it probably seems appropriate to start this out with reference to that great baseball sage Yogi Berra, who, among other things, is known for having come up with the phrase deja vu all over again. This general theme that we're talking about today, I think, has been discussed in this community at least 3 earlier times. In the early 60s, when the Dome Stadium was on the ballot. In the early 70s, when Harry Glickman had the foresight and vision to bring the Trailblazers here, and that was our first major professional team. And then in the early 90s, when the community was dealing with the issues of whether or not they would participate in the construction of a new arena and keep the Trailblazers. So in a general sense, the kinds of things that we're talking about here today and we'll be talking about in the coming months are issues that we have, to some extent, talked about perhaps in a slightly different context a number of times in our recent past. As the third speaker on this panel, I've been asked to talk about what Portland is doing to attract a major league team and whether our efforts are likely to prove adequate. This will require me to summarize the key elements of what this process involves, some aspects of which have already been touched on by our speakers, and I'll try not to be redundant in my remarks. At the outset, I think it would be helpful if I described what I believe to be the essential requirements for Portland to acquire a team. First of all, we must have a qualified and interested owner. This could theoretically be satisfied in one of 2 ways. Either there could be one or more persons or entities with sufficient net worth and income who want to own a team in Portland, or we could find an existing owner who wants to move his team to Portland. Incidentally, a new team probably costs around $150 million, to give you an idea of the number of people we might have in the local area who are capable of making this happen. Second, there must be a team available, as has been noted, either through expansion or as a result of the move of an existing franchise. I would observe that there's no formal scheduled expansion, although Major League Baseball has said that it would like to add 2 more teams by the year 2000. I would also note that while there have been constant threats of franchise moving, usually to extract more concessions out of the local community, there actually hasn't been a relocation of a franchise since the early 1970s. The third component is, as has been touched on by both the earlier speakers, is we have to have a new or remodeled stadium capable of seating at least 45,000 fans and containing suites and other amenities capable of generating revenues that are sufficient to allow the Portland franchise to field a competitive team in this day and age of free agency and at least operate, I would say, on a break-even basis. Fourth, again, as has been noted, there must be sufficient interest among regional fans to generate an above-average level of support in home attendance and local media revenue. I say above average because this is necessary given that Portland is a small market compared to most of the cities against whom its team will compete for players in this environment of free agency and with no sharing of local media revenues. This condition, of course, could change if Major League Baseball followed the policies of the NBA and the NFL and leveled the playing field among big markets and small markets by adopting a salary cap and revenue sharing. It could also change if Portland shared a team with Seattle and possibly Vancouver, British Columbia, thereby turning its shared regional team into one of the larger markets teams in all of baseball. Incidentally, with respect to the issue of fan support that Scott touched upon, I would note that the Blazers have always had the highest per capita television penetration of any NBA team, and that Portland actually had higher television ratings than New York City for the recent Yankees-Mariners playoff series. So there seems to be a base of of very strong sports fan support in this community. Now, I'm pleased to, having listed those elements, I'm pleased to report that Portland is beginning to take the first steps that could ultimately create the climate that's conducive to the satisfaction of these conditions. Mayor Katz has exhibited bold leadership in calling for a study of whether it is feasible for Portland to attract a major league team. Building on the excitement created by Jack and Mary Cain's Rockies and the Seattle Mariners' exciting rush for the pennant and the ensuing playoffs, Mayor Katz announced a few weeks ago that now was an appropriate time to investigate what it would take to attract a Major League Baseball team and whether this community could likely meet the requirements to secure a team. As I understand it, the mayor is now in the final stages of forming a task force that will be representative of the entire community to study these matters over the next few months. Separately but concurrently, Metro, Merck, and the City of Portland are planning to study the possible alternatives for Civic Stadium. Today, this is our only outdoor stadium of any size in the metro area, yet it is hopelessly inadequate and out of date. However, since it is the only present facility that we have that can conceivably meet the needs of Portland State football and the Portland Rockies, as well as possibly accommodate 2 new professional teams that would like to come to Portland, and I'm talking about Canadian football and major outdoor soccer that is just being launched in the wake of the World Cup being in the United States. We need to determine as a community once and for all what we actually have in this facility and what we can do with it. I'm hopeful that these 2 studies will tell us whether we have the ingredients that would make our city attractive for an owner to surface with the commitment to bring a Major League Baseball team here. However, I don't know what these studies will conclude, but I do know that unless they conclude there is a broad public support in the Portland area for baseball and the other uses to which a new stadium could be put, it is unlikely that Major League Baseball will be part of our near-term future. Let me close by making one final observation as to why we should make the effort to investigate this question. As you know from our experience with the Blazers, sports in general can improve our quality of life, be an important force for economic development, and most importantly, play a key role in building a sense of community. By providing a shared experience for our entire community, including people of all ages and socioeconomic classes, and I would note that baseball is the most affordable of all of the major sports, we can promote greater understanding among our citizens. To see how baseball can produce these results and what it can mean to a city and its citizens, all one has to do is look at how the Mariners brought Seattle together in September and created a tremendous sense of pride and excitement for all the different constituencies and groups in that community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks, which have pushed forward the public discussion on whether Portland's ready for Major League Baseball. My question is directed, at least initially, at Scott Lynn, and it touches upon something that Will ended his remarks with. The City Club's premier issue is rebuilding a sense of community. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the capacity of Major League Baseball to contribute to rebuilding a sense of community, or whether it could in fact increase divisions in the community as people fight over whether to spend public money on Major League Baseball as opposed to schools, whether the stadium ought to be located out in the suburbs or in the central city. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, obviously, those are some of the things that I think you have to overcome, and those are some of the things I talked about without specifying, that obviously there are other priorities and people will feel very strongly about. But I guess in answering that, I can only go back to I spent a lot of time not only driving up and down I-5 to the Seattle games, but staying there for a few days and listening to the talk shows and just observing, watching people. And the thing that came out over and over again was that it was for the first time. You heard all kinds of stories. For instance, people saying, you know, I've ridden the same bus for 14 years, and the same guy always sits in the seat across from me every morning. I've never said hi. Today he looked over at me and said, "Hey, how about those Mariners?" Those kinds of things you just don't get any other way. So it comes back to that quality of life. It gave everyone there a sense of pride, excitement. It brought that community together. Now, at the same time, it was funny because depending on the time of day, you had the sports guys talking about what a great baseball team it was and how exciting it was. The next talk show host would come in, it would be, you know, a general topic host who would talk about the stadium issue, and you'd have all the other people call and say, well, the stadium is going to take money away from fill in the blank. So it is something that is very difficult. It will be divisive. We will have people that argue the point that the money could be better spent elsewhere. But all I can say is I spent several weeks off and on in Seattle, and it was fascinating. There were probably, well, there were 55, 58,000, 57 and 58,000 every game of the playoffs. And I would venture a guess that maybe there were 10 or 15,000 baseball fans in that building. The other people were there because it was the thing to do. It was the place to be. It was excitement. I mean, everyone was doing the wave. You know, doing the wave still at a baseball game. You don't see that. You don't see it anywhere else. But it brought Seattle together. So to shorten the answer and to get to the point, I think it can do a lot of good things to bring a community together once you get beyond the money issue. And that's a tough issue to get beyond.
Steve, if I can just add, I think that unfortunately these issues usually get cast in a binary fashion. Can we do this or can we do that? I think the real issue is one of balance and finding the right point of balance. We've always dealt with issues of do we build performing arts centers, do we build parks, do we build greenways for the enjoyment of probably a certain subpopulation of the larger population. And I think those are the things taken together that make Portland what it is today. I think some people would suggest that maybe there's a deficiency actually in this component of, we'll call it the quality of life, when you look at what the interests and needs of the entire community are. But I think the real challenge for us is to find the right balance in allocating resources, scarce resources, to all of these different needs.
Ted Kay, City Club member. I've been thinking about baseball a lot because I work for the Oregon Historical Society, and we've got a great exhibit on the history of the Pacific Coast League down at the Oregon History Center. And as I look through that exhibit and see all the great baseball that was played on this coast in the first half of the century and into the late 50s here, I think about the economic development that brought for those communities. And I have a question for you, Will. A lot of your presentations are sort of downbeat. It's how are we going to convince people that it's a good idea to have baseball here? And I think that a big piece of the argument has got to be the economic development benefits of having major league sports teams. And I'd like to hear you give us some comments on what baseball would mean for Portland and its metropolitan area.
He really is excited about it, by the way.
Yeah, unfortunately, you got three strong advocates up here, and I think we were probably all a little sensitive to coming on too strong about it. But I think there's no question that major league sports has and can have an unbelievable impact in direct and indirect ways on economic development. First of all, I think it almost goes without saying that whether, again, one likes it or not, having one or more major league teams is the status of being a major city, a major metropolitan area. When we've lost a number of headquarters companies, we've recruited almost none in to Portland in the last 25 or 30 years. In fact, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is Pacific Gas Transmission that's recently moved here for, frankly, political reasons relative to their decision, although it's a great thing for the city. There's lots of ways to measure direct, economic impact, the jobs that it provides, and so forth and so on. But I think one of the most telling things is the fact that the visibility you get nationally and internationally, and baseball, by the way, is absolutely enormous in Asia and in Latin America. So it's I don't know if it's truly a global sport because I don't think it's so big in Europe. But in terms of who we do most of our trading with, it's an enormous sport. And I think baseball will go international. And I think being part of that will be one way of helping define ourselves as significant. To give you an analogy, when we hosted the Davis Cup Regional in the early 80s here, NEC was the international sponsor of that event. And the chairman of NEC came to Portland, spent a week here during that tournament, and frankly kind of fell in love with the area, went back to his company in Japan and asked whether Portland was being looked at for their first expansion into the United States. And the people said, well, we had looked at it, but they didn't make the short list. We're down to, I forget what the other cities are. And he said, well, I think you should, you know, in a soft, understated way, maybe take another look at Portland. And lo and behold, Portland came out the winner. And out of that has really grown, arguably, the Silicon Forest. They were our first major high-tech company to move into the Hillsborough area. I think initially it was 200 jobs. They have since expanded, but more importantly, you know, we've had the whole influx of Japanese companies and other companies that have expanded out there. So the indirect impacts of sports and visibility and bringing national and international business leaders and other people to this community cannot be underestimated.
I'm Joe Nadal, a member. When you're talking about the importance of winning to get passion for the game and keep up enthusiasm, I hoped you'd say, how do you define a winner? When I see lists of games scheduled, football games on Saturday, I look at this long, long list of teams, and no more than half can win. And I've told my children and grandchildren when they're in Little League Baseball and so on, get discouraged, that only half the teams can win. Now, how would you define a winner? How many would he have to win in order to get the kind of enthusiasm you're speaking of?
Well, that's a good question. Well, again, it just comes back to using Seattle as the comparison. I mean, this is a franchise that in midseason drew once or twice, drew under 10,000. Most of the season, I think I used the number 45 different dates they drew under 20,000. I'm looking at the list right now of home attendance, and it was 10, 11, 12,000 for most of the summer. And only in late September did suddenly it boom, and they drew 48,000 to 55,000 every game. So winning is, I guess, being in contention. Can't win them all. Even the Mariners didn't win them all. Lost some that they thought were going to cost them a chance at the postseason. But I think it's being in contention. Obviously, the Mariners, if that's a case study, the Mariners have done a lot of things wrong in management. They, because of the market size, had to let players go that they would have preferred to keep, perhaps. There are a lot of reasons, but the Mariners only had, what was it, 2 winning seasons prior to this? Well, maybe just 1 even, but over 500, how's that?
But I think I'd like to add on that, you know, I agree with your comment about what we tell our kids and our grandkids, and it's very true. But it also is a fact of life in the sports business that you better have, and we consider our business at the minor league level entertainment, and baseball being a big part of our entertainment package. But winning helps entertain the fans, and unfortunately, it's very unfortunate, but it is a fact of life.
I would make one other comment. I think winning is part of building a tradition early, and where getting a new stadium helps, I think, is until you do have a winner, it provides some of the reason to make that an event and a destination event, if you will. But if you look at 2 of the most successful franchises in the history of baseball, I'm talking about the Boston Red Sox playing in Fenway Park, an old stadium, to say the least, and the Chicago Cubs that play at Wrigley Field, old, small stadiums. Neither one has had a great history of winning. And yet they have the most loyal, dedicated fans. And I think a large part of it is building a tradition. And I think Portland's very capable of doing that. It may take some winning to get it going, but after that, I think we could, on average, play 500 and have a very successful franchise here.
All right, so winning's not that important.
I'm Charlie Hinkle, a member. A couple of you mentioned a regional team, and some teams around the country are beginning to explore that. the San Diego team is going to play some games in baseball in Mexico, maybe baseball too, but in Mexico next summer. Is there any possibility, or if the Mariners became a regional team, would that just kind of postpone any prospect we might have? Would it be counterproductive, or is there any real effort to get them down here to play 3 or 4 games in a summer?
Well, I've been tilting at this windmill since 1986, and candidly, I'm yet to find anyone who has told me, at least to my face, that it's a bad idea, and many people have said it's a terrific idea. But we are flying in the face of tradition, provincialism, and a whole variety of forces that make it very difficult. I will tell you that when the Mariners were on the ropes in, I think it was 1991, before Nintendo stepped in to buy them, and it looked like they would be relocated to another city, the people in Seattle got very serious about creating a regional team, and I and representatives from Vancouver, BC, were meeting with them to discuss how we could play 10 or 15 games in Portland and Vancouver each and play 50 games, say, in Seattle. I will tell you the economics of that are outstanding. It changes the dynamics of, again, Seattle is a relatively small market team when you're comparing against New York and LA and other metropolitan areas. You all of a sudden take Cascadia, the region west of the Cascades, from Vancouver down through Eugene, and you have one of the top 10 markets in the country. You have the ability to televise home games as road games to 2/3 of your market. You have a whole different media and merchandising dynamic. We had John Spolstra do a market study here in Portland. They had another firm do it up in Vancouver, BC, and I guarantee you it would add at least $20 million of annual revenue, net of expenses, to the Mariners' bottom line. Coincidentally, they're now losing $20 million a year, so it's not an irrelevant number. But I think realistically, and I hate to admit this, but I think in light of the decision to build a new stadium, that until that stadium gets built and they get over the euphoria of the new stadium and still have to eventually deal with the economics of that market, I think there's little, if any, hope of their playing games in either of these other markets.
This goes somewhat to the opposite direction from the concept of a regional team. But during the last baseball strike, one of the suggestions or solutions that was proposed for the woes of baseball as a whole was municipal ownership of all the teams, not just the stadiums, but municipal ownership of the teams as well. Excuse me, Will, what's the prospect for that here in Portland and nationally?
Well, it's very interesting. There was just an article in the Seattle Weekly which has been opposed to the stadium proposal up in Seattle as an unnecessary expenditure of taxpayer funds. Their latest proposal, which obviously didn't carry the day, was to have a municipal entity, probably King County, acquire the team and then hire a private organization to manage it on a 5-year contract basis. And the theory was that, the contracting party would get the profits and the losses from operation, and would also get an option to acquire the team for the price paid by the county plus an imputed interest charge, in effect, for the cost of carrying that investment. And the theory was this: in effect, with these stadium proposals, you're asking for, in some cases, a massive public subsidy. In the case of Seattle, it's probably approaching, when you factor in the interest, around $600 million over a 25-year period. This would, in fact, be in the nature of a loan. Have the municipal organization own the team, let a private entity take the risks and enjoy the benefits of operation, at least until such point as they want to enjoy the risks and benefits of ownership. And if there is not enough public support, as we've been conjecturing, there may not be enough fan support over the long run to support a team, then in that case you really do have to balance the subsidy element with the other needs that a community has, and if need be, let the community sell the team to another city. Say there's just simply not enough support for this activity. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, right now there's a bylaw in Major League Baseball that precludes that. I would observe there's been a lot of bylaws that have precluded a lot of things, and they've shown a lot of flexibility on them when they've had to deal with interesting issues like George Steinbrenner being suspended, or Nintendo representing Japanese ownership. but they're not wanting them to have any say in the management of the team. So I don't think that rule per se is an absolute impediment. But again, you're talking about something that hasn't been done before, at least in baseball. I think it could make a lot of sense under the right circumstances. I think it would take a while to implement something like that.
Kathy Sparacio, a City Club member. This summer, a kid could go see a Rockies game for $1. A family could take the entire family for something less than the weekly food budget. Given the costs associated with a major league team in a brand new stadium, how could we continue to provide that kind of access to people of modest means?
Well, I think that that's a problem also with the possibility of an NHL team. You know, NHL tickets are going to be considerably higher than the Portland Winterhawk tickets. I don't know the answer to that. Baseball, however, being less expensive than any of the other major sports. You can buy, I think an average ticket for a Major League Baseball game right now is about $10, average price tickets. I think the average price of the Trailblazer tickets are $45. So baseball is considerably less. Yes, it is more than $1.
Jack, excuse me, aren't the Colorado Rockies, don't they have bleachers available for $1?
Colorado Rockies have bleacher tickets for $1 too. That's where we got the name, the Rock Pile. We stole it from Colorado. But there are some Major League ballparks that still do have that inexpensive ticket.
Well, there's another factor for basketball and hockey to work. They basically have to sell out the arenas, and that means basically season ticket sales, locking in those high prices. Even at a 45,000 seat stadium, I don't think most of us would conjecture that the stadium would be sold out all the time. And I think if you can find a way to segment your audience so you're not you're not giving away cheap tickets to people who can afford to pay the $10 or whatever the right number is, I think there is a way, whether it's $1 in the bleachers or whatever, to target the people that in effect get a reduced pay, because otherwise those seats just go empty. So there is that possibility in baseball that doesn't exist very easily in the other sports.
Ken Brummel-Smith. I agree very much in terms of looking at it from the love of the game. For 10 years I was the house doctor for the Dodgers, and it was a great experience, and I very much would like to have a major league team again. But I want to just ask a couple of questions about sort of bottom line issues. Number one is it going to be grass? It's got to absolutely be grass. And number two, don't get an American League team. I mean, we need a National League team where managers can play a role in the outcome of the game and not have the stupid designator hitter role.
I'm wondering how Joe... That's right. I'm wondering how Joe Torre is going to survive. He's gone after 3 National League clubs. He's just now signed to manage the Yankees under George Steinbrenner, his first American League. He's going to be going crazy in many ways. Now, that'd be great. Those are great questions. And it really, you know, you do see a trend towards grass again. Busch Stadium in St. Louis taking out the AstroTurf that's been there since the 60s, I believe, or certainly early 70s. And they're putting the grass back in for next year. So, I mean, there is... If there's no dome, there's no reason not to have grass. No question.
Well, I think, too, if it is a baseball-only stadium, grass is very probable. The problem with a multi-purpose stadium is concerts, football games, high school football games. You couldn't do some of those things with natural grass. So if that's the advantage of having the baseball-only stadium is we could do it right.
But it also leads into the whole issue of do you have a dome and do you have a retractable dome, and it's caught up in a number of larger issues, I guess.
Let's just do the retractable then. Everybody agree?
Don Sterling, you're the last question.
Okay. What considerations move the owners of major league teams when they're faced with the question of whether they're going to vote to allow a team to move? Why would they vote yes or why would they vote no?
Greed and fear.
Well, you know, I think, yeah, that's great. I think, you know, I attended a banquet last winter, and Dale Murphy was the master of ceremonies, and the question about the baseball strike came up, and Dale mentioned, you know, they're making a movie about the current strike. It's entitled The Dumb and the Dumber, and these are the type of people we're working with. So, yeah, I think greed is a big point, though. I think that everybody's jealous, and they don't want somebody else to get into their pocketbooks.
I want to thank this panel. They weren't just designated hitters. They could pitch and they could catch and field. A great group. And Steve, thanks to you and your program committee for bringing baseball into the city of Portland in a very interesting way. This meeting is adjourned.